I'm so pleased to be talking today to somebody that I consider a role model, former politician, former MK, thought leader, author, Einat Wilf. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you for this kind introduction.
Einat, we've been hearing so many of your thoughts for so many years. You wrote a very celebrated book called The War of Return, in which you essentially chronicle the ideology behind all of the Palestinian thought, media, education. But I'm really interested, before we go into your new book, I'm really interested to hear once again from you your own story of awakening, your own story of starting in the peace camp, because I think that's really interesting to people. And at what point the as we say in Hebrew, nafala simon, the penny dropped, that it wasn't what you knew, wasn't what you were taught, and it wasn't what the world was seeing.
So it was about a decade-long process for me. Like you mentioned, I grew up politically, socially in the Israeli political left, the Labor Party, what was known in the 80s and 90s as the peace camp. And people forget, but at the time, it had a very compelling idea that repeatedly won elections. And the idea was that Israel can make peace, that Israel has a path to peace. And it's actually quite simple. All that Israel has to do was give land that is acquired as a result of the victory in the Six-Day War, and this will bring peace. And it was a compelling idea because it seemed to work. It was the basis with the peace for Egypt, which we can now review, but it seemed to be a very successful idea. It definitely governed the negotiations of the 90s. And I basically believed that, especially not just with the Arab world, but especially with the Palestine Arabs, if we just give them a state in the West Bank and Gaza and Israel's military presence, the occupation, capital in East Jerusalem, no settlements, we will have peace. And I voted for every Israeli prime minister that said they're going to make it happen, from Rabin to Peres to Barak to Olmert. And especially with Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert, I watch as they propose to two different Palestinian leaders, Arafat and Abu Mazen, in 2000 and 2008, a fully sovereign Arab state of Palestine, no settlements, no occupation, capital in East Jerusalem, including holy sites. All the things that we were told are what is necessary to make peace. And I watch as two different Palestinian leaders walk away from that, follow it up with a campaign of murderous violence, and most important, are never criticized for that. But basically, you do not find throughout all these processes a single Palestinian voice, even living in London or in the University of Columbia, who would write a piece, an op-ed that says, "Are you crazy? We can have a state. Go back to the negotiating room. Get it for us." I support the disengagement from Gaza. Like many Israelis, I'm like, you know what? Fine. If they're not going to sign an agreement, we won't be held hostage to their rejectionism. We'll just get out to the
Yes.
last square inch so that they can finally build something. And, like over the years, when people tell me, "Oh, Einat, you've really changed your views or your opinions." And I'm like, you know what? What I just described is not an opinion. It's not a view. I have opinions. That doesn't happen to be one of them. I tell them, think of it more like a scientific empirical process. We had a hypothesis. The hypothesis was, what stands between us and peace is another Arab state in the West Bank and Gaza, a Palestinian Arab state. Okay, there were a lot of reasons to think why this hypothesis is true. The 90s, the land for peace, all that. Now comes the part that people like to ignore or even erase. The hypothesis was tested
Yes.
multiple times
In
a
different
variety
ways.
of
In different ways.
Exactly. different leaders unilaterally,
That's right.
and it collapsed.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, you're a good scientist. You say, okay, the hypothesis I started with doesn't meet the empirical data. So, what alternative hypothesis meets the data? And here I always present the quote by Ernst Bevin, the British foreign minister after World War II, as you know, no friend to the Jewish people. When he needs to explain why Britain failed, Britain betrayed the mandate that it received unanimously from the League of Nations. It did not betray the mandate to the Arabs. Jordan becomes independent, Iraq becomes independent, Syria and Lebanon. But the Jews don't have independence, don't have their state. So he needs to explain the British failure. And he says the following: His Majesty's government is thus faced with an irreconcilable conflict. Now, this is February 47. There are no settlements. There's no occupation. There's no Bibi, right?
That's
There's no
right.
Ben-Gvir. There's no
No
Smotrich.
big bad wolves.
Exactly. No one is displaced also, because if people say, well, the conflict is because Zionism displaced Arabs.
Yeah.
Like in February 47, everyone is in place. No one displaced. So you have no excuses. That's what's so great. There are no excuses, and he calls the conflict irreconcilable. And he goes on to explain. He says, in the land, there are Jews and Arabs. No one, of course, is called a Palestinian. And he says, for the Jews, the top priority is to establish Jewish sovereignty, to have a state. And he says for the Arabs, and these are the Palestine Arabs, the one that will later call themselves Palestinians, he says for them, the top priority is to resist to the last, right? That word resistance, the establishment of Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land.
That's right.
The conflict is irreconcilable because the Jews want a state and the Arabs want the Jews not to have a state.
Exactly.
Now, this hypothesis meets all the data. So for me, it was more of a decade-long process, really that kind of scientific thinking of saying, okay, I had one belief, it doesn't seem to meet the experience, the data. I began to research, to learn, to meet with Palestinians who basically tell me from the river to the sea. And I realized, okay, the hypothesis that meets all the data is that this is a conflict between the Jews wanting a state and the Arabs wanting the Jews not to have a state.
Einat, it's so succinctly put, and I know that then you write this incredible book explaining that the whole point of the Palestinian identity is the negation of a state of Israel, and you do that beautifully, and of course go into UNRWA, something that we've both spoken about through my experience here in the city of Jerusalem. But I want to ask you, going down the personal route, what happened to your camp when you come up through this realization that took 10 years? You were a member of Knesset for the Labour Party. What happens to your friends? Is there a similar realization, or is there a doubling down or even a confirmation bias? You've done this. You're an academic. So you're looking at this from an academic perspective. You're talking in those terms. How is everybody else accepting your metamorphosis, let's say, or your evolution? And how does the West still hang on to this mantra of two states, despite all this, as you say, empirical evidence?
So in terms of the Israeli political camp, because this has been a process that for Israel in general, not just me, has been for the last 25 years, there's no question that this process decimated the peace camp. I mean, you saw it in election after election. You almost did not have like labor leaders pretty much after 2010 that say, let's go make peace based on land for peace or based on a Palestinian state.
So it's not an electoral issue anymore, you're saying.
Exactly. They begin to deal with economic issues or social issues because they understand that they no longer have that same compelling message that they had in the 90s. Because instinctively, most Israelis saw that it failed. Now, you're right that there are still people that I call them, they invent Palestinians that don't exist. By the way, we're still seeing it now. I'm sorry to say that even our prime minister, he just gave an interview. He said, I'm going to hand over Gaza not to Hamas, not to the Palestinian Authority, but someone else. And I'm like, what is that someone else? So many people are just now busy inventing Palestinians that don't exist.
You think
Because
some magical leadership that somehow has accepted our existence and wants to live in peace?
yes, with that, they just
Where are
expect them
they?
to somehow emerge
Yeah.
when all the incentives to them are the opposite. And this to your question about the West. So before the October 7th massacre, my co-writer Adi Schwartz and I, we spent all this time writing the book. And I can say that even people who opposed the recommendations of the book, defund UNRWA, they're now refugees, there's no such thing as a right of return, really the litmus tests for whether the Palestinians are willing to live next to a Jewish state. Even people who do not approve of the book's recommendations agree that the book is unassailable on facts. So we thought, okay, we're going to bring all these facts, and the Westerners, the Europeans who really want peace based on a two-state solution will realize that the only reason that there was never a two-state solution is the Jews were always willing to agree to a two-state solution as long as one of the two is the Jewish state.
Yeah.
And the Arabs have always rejected a two-state solution of one of the two is the Jewish state.
Well put.
So the only problem is not Israel, except for the Jewish desire to be sovereign, even in a small piece of the ancestral Jewish homeland. So what we discovered is a complete refusal to accept that. And I've come after the massacre, I had to allow a darker idea to enter my mind, which is that the West supports, I've come to call this ideology Palestinianism, this singular obsession with the non-existence of a Jewish state. I said, yes, probably there are still those in the West who support Palestinianism, not aware of what it really means. But increasingly, I have to accept that some of them support it because they do know what it means. And maybe if not consciously, maybe subconsciously, there is something in the Western mindset that still feels deeply uneasy with the idea of Jewish sovereignty, with the Jewish power, and therefore they're funding the thing that constantly undermines it.
Yes, and I remember actually, Einat, a talk of yours a number of years ago where you talk about the fact that anti-Zionism is there to counterbalance a change of the order. In other words, you taught me that essentially the powerless Jew was the order, and Zionism was the basically the opposite of that, the revolution of that. And of course, there's going to be always pushback from the change of order. But come on, it's been almost 80 years. Is it that which people have never gotten used to, the empowered Jew, the sovereign Jew, the autonomous Jew? Or is it, like you say, you go to a darker place? Or is it the fact that the Jew will always remain the scapegoat, and now it's the Jewish home that is the global scapegoat? And that is the price that they're willing to pay for the Jew to always be that abused child in the world.
So it's a combination of all that. You're saying it's been 80 years, but they have on their side 1,000, 2,000 years of an entire culture and civilization that has this idea embedded in it, woven into it. And you don't just get over it so quickly. I think even for us, it's difficult. You know, a lot of my criticism within Israel is that we are often pulled back into the exile mindset, the mindset of a weak, powerless people that are always negotiating kind of with the greater powers. It's such a powerful way of thinking that has been going on for so long that it actually takes a while to emerge from that. And even us are still, you know, we're still in some measures stuck in it. And you're right, it's very hard for so many in the world to let go of such an effective favorite scapegoat, to accept a different order. But even though these are small consolations, one of the biggest rays of light and hope that I've had for the last 2 years is some of the strongest voices for Israel, for the Jewish people, have been Arab, Muslim, and
Yes,
ex-Muslim.
absolutely.
People who actually know the truth, so they're not confused. And and what they show is that it's possible to have a proud Arab and Muslim identity and to support Jewish sovereignty. In fact, to say, look, as an Arab and Muslim, our own history, our own texts, our own traditions support the idea that the Jews belong in this land and that they're not white European settler colonialists, which are just synonyms for foreigners, get out. So yes, it's a slow transformation, but it is possible.
So I totally agree with you. Many of those Arab voices are friends of both of us, and they've been incredible. And I think they understand that in their lives as well, and prominent people like the foreign minister of the Emirates, ABZ, have said, you know, wake up. Islamic fundamentalism is in fact an enemy to all of us. It's an enemy to all of these moderate Sunni countries, and it's an enemy to the world. And the world doesn't seem to see it. But going back to the two-state argument or polemic, you know, it's always been my contention that the fact that the whole world is stuck in this mantra means that we are stuck in not innovating new solutions, because none of us want to continue living like this. And I was involved in a debate last year about the two-state solution. And what I said is that being stuck in this idea stops us from thinking about new ideas. Have you ever thought, Einat, what other possible arrangements we could see ourselves in a new era in the Middle East?
Yes. And in general, my argument has been that I'm agnostic about the
Right,
political solution,
right.
because the problem has never been the specific arrangement of the political solution. You know, for many years, I would get almost daily an email in my box, kind of, okay, what we need is 3 states, 5 states, 7 Emirates, you know, Jordan needs to annex. And I would tell all of them, look, all of these are fine. That's not where the problem lies. The problem lies in the ideology of Palestinianism. You talked about being stuck. I've been recently telling a story how a few months ago I was invited to a conference in Paris about how to make peace. It was in the French Parliament.
Mm,
And I bring the parallel of the movie The Back to the Future,
yeah,
which I'm sure you remember. There's a scene there where Marty begins to slowly understand that he's in the 50s, 30 years back, right? He goes into the diner, he
yeah,
looks at a newspaper, and he's like, oh, I'm in the 50s.
yeah.
Okay, I go into this conference in Paris. It's just a few months ago. And the whole conversation is, how do we get back to the negotiating table? How do we continue the two-state solution? How do we get there through negotiations? And it slowly dawns on me that I'm in the 90s. And at one point, the European moderator asks me, she's like, how can the EU help? And my experience is that often when Europeans ask that, they do it with this smug tone of like, how can we enlightened, peace-loving Europeans help you savages with your problems? And I told her, what would really be nice is if the EU actually remembered how it became the EU. And you became the EU not because some enlightened, peace loving Europeans sat around a table. You became the EU because the ruthless leaders of the Allies understood that World War II, unlike World War I, cannot end with some wishy washy armistice and ceasefire. It will end with the unconditional surrender of those who fought on the other side. Not only will they lose, they will know that they lost. They will pay a price in territory. They will pay a price in the displacement of millions, tens of millions. They will pay reparations. Everyone that was on the other side, not just Germany and Japan, all their supporters, except the Italians who flipped at the last moment, they're good at that, all their supporters
Yeah.
will know that they were on the losing side and will remember that. And I told them only after the Allies did that, unconditional surrender, total defeat, occupation,
That's
dismemberment, denazification,
demilitarization.
Exactly. Only then can you sit around a table and create the EU. And I told her, you know what? That's all I want for our people. What you have is what I want. I want for the ideology of Palestinianism, this obsession for more than a century that the Jews can have nothing and that anything that is more than nothing is unacceptable. That obsession, that ideology has to die so that Jews and Arabs can finally live. Now, once the Arabs are no longer obsessed with the destruction of the Jewish state, what exact political arrangement they want to live, as I said, I'm happy everything becomes possible. You can negotiate numerous ideas. The problem is that everyone tries to come up with political arrangements and solutions before dealing with the core issue, which is this obsessive ideology of destruction.
What did they say, Einat, when you said that? I wish I would have been a fly on the wall.
There was actually this
Silence.
stunned silence.
Oh my God.
And some people came up to me after and they said, no one has ever said that. And and I'm like, really? Don't you know, people talk about privilege or privileged opinions. I'm like, is your memory so short that you really don't know why you're enjoying peace and prosperity for 8 decades now? Seriously, the American vice president now, I love to see all the comments, recently said wars end with negotiations. And everyone in the comments were like, yes, after the other side is defeated, then you negotiate. And it's just amazing how people forgot such basic ideas and they exchange them for this wishy-washy of we just sit around the table and that's how we get to peace.
They
No,
forgot.
you get to peace after the ideology that created war is defeated.
Absolutely.
And then you can make peace.
Absolutely. I get interviewed in the press all the time. And when I talk about surrender, I say to them, imagine if at the end of the Second World War, there was a movement saying, let Hitler keep a little province in Germany and, we'll contain him. That it wouldn't have even come up. It was a different world. And I think you're right that people got comfortable in this peace and prosperity and they forgot what war looks like. And this is part of this propaganda against us, that they forgot that war is horrible, a war that, of course, we didn't start. Einat, you've now written a book since October 7th, and which is a continuation of your original book about the War of Return. Tell us a little bit, some highlights of your new thoughts of the new Middle East order, world order after October 7th.
So this new updated book, the book in English was called The War of Return when it came out in 2020. And it was considered a very harsh title, The War of Return. But what the new book in Hebrew, also using the title Shiva B'Oktober, Shiva as in return, um, basically argues that October 7th was the War of Return, was just another chapter, a very brutal chapter in that century or 80-year long war of return, the war to undo the Jewish state. So, what this updated book does is it still includes the history, but it brings us to the present. And it basically makes the argument much more clearly, again, about this ideology of Palestinianism. In the book, we kind of coined this term Palestinianism. We make it clear that there's no future of peace
That's right.
without the destruction of this ideology. And we talk about how to destroy this ideology, first and foremost, by killing off its supply lines, uh, highlighting UNRWA as the fueling station number one of Palestinianism, what allows Palestinianism to persist. The idea that they are perpetual refugees, that this needs to go away, the idea that there is even such a thing as a right of return. In the past, even Adi and I used a term like they need to give up the right of return. But a lot of what I do is become much more and more precise in my language. So over the years, I've come to be more precise. And now I say they need to recognize that there is no right
There's
of
no
return.
right of return.
There's nothing to give up because
Right.
there's no such thing. They just need to realize that there is no such thing. So the book essentially argues that the main mission of Israel, diplomatically, politically, and militarily, is to essentially wake up every morning and chip away at Palestinianism. And there are numerous opportunities every single day to do that, which unfortunately we're not taking advantage of.
Totally agree.
So on this
So,
issue,
so,
right?
so give us
Go
some of
ahead.
these opportunities that you see in
Okay.
front of us. We need a
So
bit of
one of
hope
my
here. We need a bit of hope, Einat.
Okay. One of my favorite opportunities. The American president proposes all like his plan for Gaza, right?
Yeah.
Everyone kind of goes crazy.
Yeah.
And especially the Arabs are saying, oh no, you cannot displace the people of Gaza. Gaza is their home. This would have been a perfect opportunity for Israel to say, look, if the American president wants this plan, we support it. But you know what? You're finally telling us 75 years too late that Gaza is
Is
their
your home.
home.
Exactly.
Yes,
They were
because you've
refugees
spent
a minute ago. Exactly.
exactly for 75 years, you told us that this is not your home,
That's right.
that you will return, that Gaza is just a temporary place you inhabit until you end the Jewish state. So we're happy to enter into discussions that will lock in the idea that everyone living in Gaza is home. This would have been a wonderful opportunity to say, great, can we lock it in that the people in Gaza are home? We're willing to discuss that.
Exactly. You can't
Or
have
for
it both ways. You can't have it both ways.
Exactly.
And if they're home, why do you need a refugee agency?
Precisely. Or all these countries that are now wanting to recognize Palestine.
Yes.
Rather than being the Israel that says no. As I'm sure you know, every smart parent knows that with kids, you don't tell them no, you tell them no to this, but yes to that, right?
Yes.
You give them what is the yes. So go to all these countries and say, look, you're telling us that you want to recognize Palestine in order to keep the two-state solution alive, right? That's what they always say. Wonderful. The two-state solution, we'd like to remind you, was about a Jewish state and another Arab state. So if you want to recognize Palestine as part of a two-state solution, this is what it looks like. Make it clear that the package of your recognition involves defunding UNRWA, making it clear, issue an official legal opinion of your Ministry of Justice or Foreign Affairs that there is no such thing as a right of return. that no one living in the Palestine that you are about to recognize is a Palestine refugee. Put all that package together and recognize Palestine.
I will add
Let's
one more. Renounce violence. Renounce violence. Renounce terrorism. Renounce the war of return. Like you're saying. Exactly.
So give this whole package.
Yeah.
And then let's see if
they accept it.
And Hamas will congratulate you for this recognition. So all I'm saying is that we have numerous opportunities that all emerge from one thing, which is the Palestinians, to their credit, never lie on this issue. They lie on everything else: genocide, famine, open air prison, apartheid, race. They lie on everything that will demonize and is a libel against Israel, because they know there's a market for that. But the one place where they never lie, they sometimes keep quiet, but they never lie. And if you ask them the correct questions, they will not lie. They never lie about the fact that their entire worldview and identity are wrapped up in the negation of Jewish sovereignty. So we need to constantly call them out on that.
Well, that would involve creative, diplomatic, and strategic thinking, which unfortunately I think that our leaders need a lot more of. And hopefully we would have people like you in the political leadership in the future. Einat Wilf, you're one of a kind. Thank you for the incredible work that you do, telling the truth and giving people not just the facts, but creative solutions to the future. And we look forward to having you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.